Hello, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful opportunity, this free flash webinar with myself. My name is Zach Groshell, and this is Blake Harvard. And we're going to be talking to you about some of the stuff that we know as classroom teachers, and what some of what we've been investigating in terms of our books and our planning and how we've been interfacing with teachers and the science of learning. So we're going to be talking to you all about attention and explanation in this webinar. So let me just go ahead and get started. Um, these are our books. Don't let anyone tell you that you can get rich on books. Let me tell you, it's but Blake and I have had a great experience of being able to share share our thoughts through writing through many school districts around the world, actually. And so I'll just introduce myself. My name is Zach Groshell. I taught fourth grade, third grade, and fifth grade for 14 years, and I became an interventionist and eventually an instructional coach and school leader. And now I am providing training to schools all over the world, in fact. Blake, what about you?
Yeah, so my name is Blake Harvard. I just finished up my 19th year of teaching. I taught 6 or 7 years at the middle school level, and then the last 12 or so at the high school level. You see my book there, Do I Have Your Attention? Um, and I'm just really focused on doing what evidence tells us reaches our students the best and creates the best environment and instruction for learning.
And with that, I mean, let's get ourselves a little bit centered on some of this nomenclature, some of the kind of what, what is our foundation when it comes to this presentation, and how do we understand the science of learning and the tactics that go along with these principles. And so the first thing I think really is important is that the center of all of this is the learner and what prior knowledge they bring to the experience, what they might be really skilled at and fluent with, and what they may be new to them, what they have in their heads in terms of their sort of the novice expert distinction there is extremely important. However, we don't blame the learner for not learning, right? Essentially, if we did not facilitate learning, it's a teaching problem. And so that's why, as teachers, our main job is to curate the environment and to design instruction that honors what is going on in the students' heads, right? And so the first kind of bit here, and I'm not sure if you've seen this graphic before, but if not, I just love talking about it. This is basically the information processing model. What we have is we have a learner at the center of our efforts, and then on the outside of the learner, we have the environment, the stuff that they need to pick up and learn, the textbook and the worksheet and the words coming out of my mouth, right? And one of the main things that we can be pretty certain of is that if the learner does not select that information or attend to it, and invest some level of effort into perceiving and grabbing onto that thing with their cognition, if the learner's not paying attention, they're not going to learn, and they're not going to think about anything that we want them to think about, right? So that's why people say in cog sci world, like attention is like the gateway to cognition. Without it, really, there's not much of a chance of a kid learning anything we're teaching them. Pretty obvious, I know. So one of the things I'm thinking about when I put on the two hats as like an instructional coach or a leader is the teacher grabbing all the students' attention? Are they able to sustain attention? And that's what Blake's going to be talking about today. However, attention's not the end of learning. It's really the beginning. One of the core structures of the mind that every teacher should be thinking about in order to make predictions and explain how learning happens is working memory. And working memory is this very limited structure in the mind. It's just part of the model of the mind that deals with information. It's what is like the predictive processing unit, the one that makes predictions and generates answers, but also is using prior knowledge to make sense of the world. It's our thinking system. It's the site of conscious thought. The problem with working memory is it's extremely limited. And so if we present way too much information, or we present it in a really garbled way, or we don't give enough, students enough time to rehearse the information and make sense of it, essentially what goes into working memory is going to quickly slip out of working memory. And working memory can only hold like 4 items at a time for only like 20 seconds. This is the essence of cognitive load theory. If we do not curate the environment and design instruction so that we slowly and surely give small step presentations to students when they're first learning information, we can overload their working memory, causing them to not learn anything, regardless if they're looking at the information or not. They have to think about it and they have to commit their mind to it. But if the effort that they put into it is way too much, they can get frustrated and learning will not take place. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about today is how can we as teachers optimize our communications so that yes, they're paying attention to it, but that they are thinking about the right things and that they're not thinking about too much and that they are that we are managing the instructional design and regulating information so it's just right so that students think about the stuff we want them to think about in really effortful ways. The learning model doesn't end there, though, but our presentation does. We do know that everybody has a long term memory that's basically limitless, and that what we need to do is after the student thinks about it and attends to it, that they are processing it, that they're rehearsing it. So teachers not only have to just teach and explain really well, we also have to pull it out of them and get them to really think hard about what we're talking about. This is where we talk about turn and talks and mini whiteboards and choral response. Lots of driving thinking is very important in teaching. However, even if they think about it and they really process it, they might come away with the wrong understandings, right? They just have a misconception. So the next part of like the model of teaching, as you can see it start to populate your screen, is teachers really need to gather evidence of student learning through lots of formative assessment. Because even if we teach it the best way possible, the student, may not have the same understanding as we are meant to embed in their long-term memory. So we need to collect information from them and adjust our teaching accordingly, right? And finally, kind of to finish off, we know that forgetting is almost inevitable. We forget more than we seem to retain. So the final piece of this kind of working this information processing model is how do we get kids to retrieve information a lot by bringing it back into working memory to prevent forgetting and to how do we ensure consolidation, constant review of learning. I'll give you a chance to just take a look at this for a second and kind of read all the parts that I just mentioned. Now let me test your understanding. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to put the number that I'm referring to in my example into the chat. It's a bit interactive today. Okay. So what you're going to do is I'll give you an example at the top of like a scenario, and you just tell me what number. Is it one, two, three, four, five? In class, I would have everyone use their fingers, but here we are on Zoom. So, um, let's go ahead and try the first one. So, the scenario is as the teacher begins explaining a new math concept, half the class is still chatting with their friends and not looking at the board. Which of these persistent problems on your screen are we referring to? Go ahead and put it in. And we're all correct. We're 100%. Don't we feel good, right? We are on fire. And we talk a lot about much sexier things in education than attention, but you go to classrooms as often as I do, and the problem is the kids aren't listening, right? There's nothing else that can be resolved or fixed until there's some level of calm in the room and some level of an expectation that all students try everything, attend to everything, do everything, right? So that's right. Here's your next one. A teacher's explanation is so hard to understand that the students are unsure what they're supposed to do. I can't fool you, can I? We are on number two. How about this one? The teacher frequently asks questions, then tells the answer instead of recruiting students to think. My goodness, we are 100% on fire, this crew right now. Rowing the boat together, aren't we? The teacher frequently asks students any questions before moving on to the next part of the lesson plan. Is it way too scaffolded that I did this in exactly the right order? Yes, it was. I should have randomized it, but that's okay, right? I'm feeling good about how we're processing this diagram. And finally, students complete a history lesson, but there's no summary or review, making it hard to retain key points. We got this. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Blake Harvard, who's going to focus on the attention side of this model, and I'm going to end this presentation talking about the working memory or the optimizing communication side of this model. Blake, ready to go?
Yeah, I'll take it from here for a minute. Yeah, for sure. Let me see if I've got everything where it needs to get everything rock and rolling here. Let me see. Yeah, so I had a little introduction thing going, but I mean, I've already introduced myself, right? So again, I've been in the classroom for 19 years now, about to start 20. I became intensely interested in this probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And since then, I've been reading and writing on my website, and again, eventually my book here that came out in January about this. And I am a teacher, and I think like a teacher. I try to present like a teacher, right? That's the only thing I know, so I don't know any other way of doing it. So when I'm talking to you here, I've thought through this and think about how does it impact the students in a classroom, right? Because that's the person, those are the people that we are tasked with teaching. So I am passionate about teaching in the most efficient and the most effective way. And you can't do that without paying attention to memory, right? It seems pretty ridiculous that a lot of us probably went through and got our degrees in education, and took, if any, like no classes on human memory, which is pretty wild to think that so many of us are, that it's our job to teach people, but we don't really know how that works, right? So when I realized that massive gap in my education as a teacher, I became just like super laser focused on that. And that's kind of what I'm talking about today. Again, the main idea here is definitely attention. There's, as Zach just kind of showed us, there's a lot going on with memory, and we'd need way more than an hour to talk about all of it. So I'm just focusing on the attention aspect of it because, again, as that classroom teacher, I see so much when we think about the process of memory, from sensing it up top here all the way down to getting it to long-term memory. I think probably the biggest disconnect there in the classroom, in the real, 30 students sitting there looking at you, is with attention, right? We can get the kids to sense it, right? I can speak loud enough that all the sound waves goes into all their ears, or they see it, but can I get them to pay attention to it? Right? And thinking about all of the things in a classroom and in our everyday life that steal attention from us. So I'm going to talk about those things also that kind of steal attention, but some of them might not be what you're thinking about, right? So attention, it's it's part of the process of learning. It's not everything, but it's an absolutely necessary part of this process. If we don't have their attention, they can't learn, right? Whatever we are attending to, we have a chance of learning. But if we're not paying attention to something, there's no way to learn it. So attention is, guys, so central to it. And so many teachers don't think about that when they're designing their classroom and when they're designing instruction, right? And I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about it, right? So when we think about attention, there are a few things that kind of get in the way of attention. And I'm not necessarily yet talking about like disruptions in the classroom, right? We know that certain disruptions take everyone's attention away from learning. It can take our attention away from teaching. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But this is coming from a paper by Dr. Stephen Chu, and it's a big part of what I talk about in my book. This is just one part of it, but he talks about what are certain choke points and pitfalls. And a choke point is something, it's a constraint on human memory, right? It's not we're teaching them incorrectly or correctly. It's everyone is bound by these kind of constraints of human memory. So there are two choke points that we see at the point of attention, according to Dr. Stephen Chu. And then you see on the right there, there's a pitfall. And a pitfall is something that it is controlled by the human. Like we do this, or our students do this, and it impacts our ability to attend to what we need to attend to, right? So I'm just going to mention these briefly. I'm not going to dive into this too much. But you see the first choke point up there, mental effort or concentration is a limited resource. Again, attention is limited. We cannot attend to everything, right? So as much as we can, and I know I may be saying something like almost like a dirty word here, but like sometimes we got to memorize some things, right? It pays to memorize the multiplication tables, right? So we can move on to bigger and better things, and that knowing what 6 times 8 is, if I automatically know that it's 48, that doesn't have to occupy my limited working memory, and I can move on to bigger and better, more complex mathematical computations there. So because mental effort is limited, we need to overlearn, and we need to make some things that are at first effortful, right? Making them automatic, right? Again, learning to read is a fantastic example of this. It is incredibly effortful as a student is learning to read, right? Learning vowel sounds and blending words and things like that, blending letters, sorry. But once those things become automatic, then we can move on to more of the what is this sentence saying? What does it mean, right? So that choke point is huge, right? The choke point just below it. Again, because we can only attend to certain things, how we design our learning environment and how we design instruction has to be very focused, right? Students need to avoid distractions, and distractions are everywhere. And again, I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. The pitfall over there is that we think we can multitask, but we cannot, right? Students will try to study at home with, their favorite show playing on the side, but I've got my textbook open and I'm reading it, right? While I'm also trying to watch this television show, or I've got my cell phone and I'm replying to these notifications while I'm also trying to, read this passage in English literature. You can't do both of those things. And there are studies show that like even if you're trying to go back and forth from one thing to the next, that's not multitasking. That's called task switching. And there is memory loss in going back and forth between those 2 or 3 things, whatever is you're trying to multitask and do. So we need to talk to our students in a way that they know these things so that they design a streamlined environment for learning. Not only do they see it in our classroom, but we talk to them about how they can do it at home, right? Because one day they're going to leave our classroom, right? And they're going to need to learn somewhere else. And the great thing about everything that Zach and I are talking about today is that it doesn't just pertain to elementary school, middle school, high school. It doesn't just pertain to my AP psychology class. It is learning across the board, right? And it doesn't have to be learning in a 4-walled classroom. It's everywhere, right? So these things are advantageous for every single person to know, not just sitting in a classroom, right? And it's important to tell our students about that. Now, going into attention, one thing that's kind of a newer kind of field of study, or a new term to go along with attention, is what's called attention contagion. And this is just the idea of, are attentive or inattentive behaviors, are they contagious? And think about that within the frame, in the mind frame of a classroom, right? If you've got 30 students sitting in your classroom, right? If Billy over here is not paying attention, does that impact the people around him, right? Or if Billy is paying attention, does that impact the actions of the people around him, right? And thus far, there have been three studies on this, and I'm very briefly going to gloss over this. Again, my book goes into much greater depth on this. Um, but there are three studies on this. The first study was done in a lab, right, with two students. One was the real true participant, and one was a Confederate who was told to either pay attention or not, right? The next study, and that was in 2021. The next study was in 2023, and that was actually in a virtual environment just like this. So if you're sitting and you're looking at your computer right now and you've got the thumbnails across the top, that's exactly how the second study was set up. And it was we're watching, again, we're watching Zach, and we're seeing, is Zach paying attention because of what all the other thumbnails are doing, right? Are the other thumbnails paying attention, and does that impact Zach's attention? Or are the others thumbnails not paying attention, and does that impact Zach's attention? That was the second study. The third study was done in a college classroom with 60 students. And again, this one is much more in depth. And again, I can't go into all of it right now, but Confederates were spread throughout that environment. There were 15 Confederates in that 60 class. So you got 45 participants and 15 Confederates. And again, some of them were told to pay attention. Some of them were told to not pay attention, right? And you can see down here on my slide here what the attentive Confederates would be doing. They'd be nodding their head, paying attention. They'd be obviously looking at the lecturer. They'd be taking notes. They would not be looking at their phone. If they had a computer pulled up, they're not on another website, doing all the things that an attentive student should do, right? Pay more attention, though, to the inattentive Confederates, right? I said earlier that, like, when, some distractions are obvious. If the principal comes over the intercom, that distracts everyone, right? We know that steals attention. If a student stands up on their desk and starts singing, we know that's stealing attention. But what about these more, like, I say they're more covert. They're more covert thieves of attention, right? Just a student that's just sitting there and just staring off to the side, or a student that's sitting there and just kind of slouched back in the chair, or a student that is not taking the notes, right? And you see the one down there at the bottom with the asterisk beside it, or a student that is checking on their phone or looks to be on another website. Now, I put an asterisk there because that was only used in the virtual environment study, right? So on the other studies, there was no checking a phone or website as a variable at all, okay? And teachers, you know where this is going, all right? You know where this is going. People that were seated around the inattentive Confederates were more likely to not pay attention to. They were more likely to be inattentive, right? So the inattentive behaviors appeared to be contagious in all three of these studies. Unfortunately, and this is the way it goes, the attentive Confederates did not sway the attention of the people around them as much, right? So if you were next to an inattentive Confederate, that was more likely to impact you in a negative way than being around an attentive Confederate would be, and make you more likely to pay attention, right? So some of the general kind of results of these three studies, right? If you were next to an inattentive Confederate, you were more likely to be less motivated. You saw the lecture or the lesson as being less important, right? Hey, if Billy's not paying attention, why should I pay attention, right? They're taking fewer notes, right? What's interesting, that bottom one down there is kind of the one that stuck out to me the most, right? If you were seated next to an inattentive Confederate, you could pick it out. You could say again, man, Billy didn't pay attention. But what you were not good at doing was noticing how that negatively impacted you. Most of the participants noticed the inattentive Confederates. They were really good at picking up on that. But when they were asked, do you think that impacted you? Not all of them, but a vast majority of them said, nope, didn't stop me from doing what I needed to do at all. But when we look at the results of how many notes were taken, and when we look at the assessments, right, after the lecture, that just wasn't true. People that were around the inattentive Confederates took fewer notes, significantly took fewer notes. Participants that were around inattentive Confederates scored significantly lower on the post-lecture assessments, right? So the idea that being around an inattentive Confederate doesn't impact me. Well, these three studies that aren't showing that result. They're showing the opposite of that, right? Okay. So why does this matter? It matters because, and I've been guilty of this myself, right? And I'll bet you have been too, right? If we're being honest, of saying, "Hey, Billy's not paying attention," but as long as Billy's just not messing with anybody else, I don't care, right? He's not distracting anyone else. Well, we can't say that anymore because these three studies show that even though Billy's sitting there quietly and, more covertly not paying attention, it is still paying attention. It's still stealing attention from the people around him, right? And you also know how this goes is that if others see you let Billy not pay attention, guess what they're going to think is okay to do? Well, it's all right if Billy doesn't pay attention. I don't have to pay attention, right? Coach Harvard's going to let it go. So cool. No, you can't do that, right? Everyone needs to be paying attention. And I know Zach's about to mention this. Everyone needs to be participating. Everyone needs to know that you've got to buy in at every step of this. Nobody gets to sit out, right? And again, like going back to what I mentioned earlier, you only have a chance of learning what you're attending to, right? And the more we attend to it and the more we participate, which Zach's going to talk about in just a minute, the better the chance of remembering it long term, right? And I haven't put this in here, but we need to talk to our students about this. You know, it doesn't matter if you're teaching middle school, high school, or even elementary school. Now, of course, if I'm talking to a 7-year-old, that's different. I'm going to talk about it differently than how I talk to a 17-year-old. But we need to talk to them about, hey, you may not think you're impacting others, or you may not think you're impacted by others, but you are. You are, right? And you're here to learn. So you might as well get the most out of it as you can, right? And as teachers, we also need to think about how we set up our classroom, the classroom environment. We can create hurdles to learning and to paying attention before the lesson even starts, right? I know that it may look better for a classroom observation for you to have students sitting in groups and, kumbaya and all that. And I'm not saying that group work doesn't have a place in the classroom. It does. It does. But when I'm teaching something to students for the very first time and I need them to be locked in because I know they don't know Eric Erickson's psychosocial uh, sorry, Eric Erickson's psychosocial theory. Like I know they don't. Who just knows that? I can barely say it, right? So I know they need to be sitting and paying attention to this as much as possible. So I need everyone locked in, everyone paying attention, looking, facing the front, right? I need few distractions on the walls, right? I'm not saying make it set up like a prison and it's just cinder block, but if it's up there, it better be worth something, right? And then, as Zach's about to go into talking about the instruction side of things, is the next thing you've got to set up to maximize this attention. Because again, if we lose the attention, we've lost everything, right? So attention is, again, it's not everything for learning, but it's necessary. You can't learn without paying attention. The things we're teaching in a classroom. So, I've kind of just broad strokes gone over this, and I feel like I'm rushing here, but I want to honor your time. But I go into much greater depth with this, talking more about just the process of memory and this attention in my book and in the presentations I lead. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. But from here, Zach, take over. Let's talk about instruction.
I love it. And even before I dive into this, I just have all these thoughts in my head. I kind of want to take Patrice Bain is on the call, although she said she's working on Father's Day stuff, so I will not force her away from I don't know what she's doing, brining a turkey or whatever she's doing. I'm not going to take her out of there, but one of her strategies she calls retrieve taking, and that's where you basically like you have all these thoughts, but you don't use your notes at this moment. I'd like you in the to put in the chat, my friends here. What are some of the main takeaways that you got out of this so far? Maybe two takeaways that you feel like that you got out of Blake's presentation. Go ahead and type that into the chat. that will also allow us to get some feedback in terms of what what kind of questions we might need to answer going forward. So go ahead into the chat. Two things you took away from that part of the presentation. Blake, you and I were doing a great job of resisting the urge to talk during this time. Again, another thing I see just how important attention needs to kind of drive our decision making is I'm talking while everyone's trying to type, and they're having a hard time focusing on what they're doing, and instead they're switching between listening to me and what they're supposed to be doing and doing neither very well, right? So giving everybody in the class a chance to write in silence is a great idea.
Exactly. Yeah. Giving everyone a chance to think is huge. But teachers are notoriously bad at giving them that time, right? Right. We want to rush to the next thing. Here we go. Okay, good, good. Right. And we still got 12 people writing. Silence is golden, right?
Silence is golden. Well, let me go to the next part over here, keeping the pace at a nice brisk clip as you should, and getting this out of the way. Here we go. So Blake's kind of run us through some very early insights around attention, including the influence of fidgety peers and non-attentive peers, but also the opposite effect where having a class that sort of you feel like you're in the in group because everybody is attending and focused with their full body, that can have a positive effect on the culture and on the learning of your classroom. And things like teachers designing in order to not have kids multitasking, having lots of different things you might choose to do at the same time. Some of you are probably multitasking on your phones or you're cooking right now. You know you're not getting the most out of this presentation, right? So that's one of those things is like, how do we get everybody to kind of, in a serial way, do one thing at a time so that they get the most out of these opportunities we give them and that these opportunities are designed in a very meaningful and manageable way. Speaking of manageable, let's talk about explaining better. So, I mean, it couldn't have had a better framing for a webinar, which was, do I have your attention? And now that I got your attention, you know what? Let's just tell them, right? We're talking now about really explicit instruction, but mainly the modeling area of explicit instruction. And I'll just go through three things I want you to learn about in my part right here. Now, none of the things that I put on the screen, and none of the things Blake has said, is especially innovative sounding. I always feel like people are going to say, "Isn't this common sense?" Right? Of course it is, right? A lot of times, what we're doing in science is documenting what works, and what works is what people feel is also intuitively true, right? And that there's nothing really, especially game changing and groundbreaking in these three findings, and yet and yet not adhering to these principles is basically makes teaching very difficult and learning impossible. So let's start with this kind of explain clearly bit. I have a whole chapter about clarity of explanations. There's such good research going all the way back to the 80s that what they'll do is they'll take two different conditions and compare them. One is the unclear format that you see on the left of your screen. One is the clear format that kind of gets rid of all of the vague terms, the unnecessary kind of rambling, some of what the researchers call mazes, where the speaker kind of stops and stutters and juts between different things. Um, One of the things that I would hesitate to tell a teacher is you need to be more clear because what does that mean? And and what do I do about it? I would have done it in the first place if you gave me a shot, right? If, I mean, if I knew what to do and if I knew how to be clearer. But the thing that you can do with the clarity of your explanation is really to rehearse and practice what you're teaching. And we know this is true, that rehearsal works, because when you start on period one and you give that first version of the explanation and you go down to period six, by the time you're at the end, it has been so rehearsed and smoothed out that you start to omit all of the parts of your speech that are unproductive or unnecessary. How do we kind of get ahead of that? Well, practicing to an empty room, right? Practicing on the way to work. Simply scripting, like writing down what are the things that you're going to use. Since I'm an elementary teacher, a lot of the programs that they give us for like phonics, for example, they are scripted. And so it's literally just sticking to the minimal statements that are in the script rather than going off script and adding a bunch of extra things to think about. The graphic here just shows that when I give students just enough information to think about, that the student will have more working memory capacity that is available to be allocated towards processing the load of the material that they're supposed to be working on, right? So, just the, I mean, that's just one aspect of it. If we look into research, you see that there's all different ways they've tested these idea of like clarity and coherence in our presentations. Things like they'll put like dancing dog gifs and things like that on the screen. And as the teacher is talking, or as the student's meant to work in the online learning environment, the the student gets distracted by what's there. It's an extra element to be processed in working memory. The communication isn't clear. It's scattered, it's cluttered, the presentation isn't very cohesive. So, like right now, you're having trouble paying attention to me because of this cute dog. Things like animations and just extra stuff, like I'll block this one out just so you don't have to look at it. But there's been such great studies going back to Richard Mayer's work in the 2000s, where they would do a science lesson. One group in the science lesson, what do they get? They get the science lesson just as intended, just with the things that the student needs to know. And the science lesson is about lightning formation. And they're just learning about the scientific process of how lightning is formed. In group B, however, that group gets the opportunity to watch a video of an airplane getting struck by lightning, or people, being carted out on stretchers after being struck by lightning, and ambulances, and all types of seductive and sort of interesting things that perhaps are going to divert their attention and working memory away from thinking about the science. We can all guess what happened, right? The students with the extraneous load, the extra seductive details of the video, and their attention was diverted towards that, and they learned less science compared to the group that just had a plainer presentation, right? This is all about just thinking about everything we say imposes some sort of cognitive load. So having an economy of language and a minimalistic sort of presentation and design is actually better for learning, especially the kids that need that the most. I'll refer to myself as that ADHD kid who had all these medications back in elementary school. And what would happen to me is a teacher would do something as simple as say, Zach, I need you to go down the hall and go talk to the custodian and go have them get you a dustpan and a broom and bring it back because we need to sweep up this mess. What would happen to me? Each of those instructions are another thing to think about. Of course, the classroom is messy. I'm so proud I got selected. I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about, do I run? Do I walk? What's the fastest route? By the time I get to the custodian, I stand in front of the custodian and I say, I actually don't know what I'm even doing here and what I'm supposed to be asking you, right? It's just as simple as there was too much information, and possibly the teacher could have broken it down and had me repeat back each of the elements so that I would have processed that in working memory. And so that when I was off to go, I was only thinking about those things as I'm going down the hallway. Right. And I think of this in just in terms of everything. I love this example that came from when I was teaching third grade. My students were meant to be learning about Venn diagrams. And there's a comparison and you are, similarities and differences, put the similarities in the middle. I meant to show them how to do it. The kids are kind of slouching, looking bored and tired. So I decide to say, well, doesn't a Venn diagram kind of look like a butt, right? And when I said that, it was just meant to kind of get them to perk up and maybe listen more. But I introduced something that was so funny to the kids that everybody just starts laughing. And now I'm not able to write about what I was supposed to be talking about because the kids are thinking about the wrong things. They're laughing and joking because I'm writing on a butt rather than thinking about Venn diagrams. So many examples of teachers who, with even though they have the best intentions at heart, uh, they go off on anecdotes, they go off on tangents. They're sort of talking around the content. Kids need explicitly designed, curated lessons that are very broken down and very specific and direct. And you know this when you start working with special needs students and, like, for example, intervention settings, that special education teachers have learned this early on. I'll have no shot at teaching this unless I get really granular. And we say in education sometimes that this is called spoon feeding, and we use it as a derogatory term. I find that a bit insulting, to be a little spicy, because there are kids in every classroom that is the accommodation that they need, is very explicitly broken down instruction, as opposed to rambling, ambiguous, unclear formats of teaching that include lots of extraneous information. One of the areas that my book kind of goes into that I just love is around visuals, and how visuals are one of those things that make information concrete. It's what harnesses the dual coding principle, that when you pair images with speaking, that we often learn better in a more optimal way, that working memory is not impacted in a negative way by a carefully paired visual. So here up on your screen, I have a text that this is what the teacher is saying. It's in their lecture. Go ahead and read what's on your screen, and in the chat, give me a guess of what this person is talking about. Does anybody know? Go ahead and press return. No idea? Give it a stab, huh? And I'm debating Bradley Bush about pre-questions in next week, and I just realized that I used a pre-question here, and I meant to argue against pre-questions. But okay. Um, so we have right here a text. Do you know what it is? It's a bicycle pump. Rebecca, you get the grand prize because you said some sort of pump. Oh, and Desiree swooped in, I'm not sure, with the bicycle pump. Now, that is true. It's a bicycle pump. Much better and sort of obvious, I would assume, would simply be to take this text, let's see if my mouse is going, and just pair the speaking with the diagram that you are teaching it with. What this does is, because language is so transient, it goes into one ear, it comes out the other. It's all these elements being put into, into the environment. The kid is meant to grab on and somehow order it and process it and retain it. It doesn't happen. And so having visuals, the explanation is simply that they can pair in long-term memory a connection between the memory trace of the visual and the memory trace of the words, and those don't uh, cause more of a cognitive burden. Actually, they optimize learning because working memory is like a dual processing system. One of the things, though, that when you think about visuals, just like I mentioned previously, would be that you'd want to cut things from the presentation that just simply are unnecessary, things that are extraneous. They make stuff the diagram smaller is the first thing to think about, but also the kids might be looking at the bear, looking at the helmet, thinking about their bicycling experience. Is that bad for kids to connect things to their own experience? Absolutely not. It certainly is not what you want them to be thinking about when you're teaching the mechanics of a bicycle pump, right? So just focusing them in on a very carefully designed diagram or image that perfectly relates to what you're talking about is the next principle there. Speaking with visuals is very, very effective. It's been shown through many, many studies around dual coding. However, you can get it wrong in other ways. Having lots of extra text on the screen, excessive text, the kids aren't going to read it. Like, let's just be straight up about that. They're not going to read it. If they are going to read it, they're going to be reading it rather than listening to what you're saying. To which point I would ask, why are you talking while they're reading? And if they're reading, why are you having them read while they're meant to be listening to you? So that scanning and switching right there is not optimizing communication. It's not optimizing working memory. It's causing kids unnecessary strain on their working memory. So much better is just to take it out, speak over. There are other exceptions though. Small captions that pair with the pictures tend to be okay. It's just not that much information. And there are students that need accommodations like subtitles. The subtitles aren't necessarily very good for the rest of the kids. It's very interesting, but for kids with like my mom is deaf and she teaches deaf kids and hard of hearing kids, that might be an accommodation that serves them. And essentially, we're balancing the needs of all the students in our classrooms. But for the most part, we see presentations in which there is just all this text on the screen, and I want to run up to the cognitive scientists and tell them you're not using your own principles, right? We need to take these off of the screen, right? One of the things that gosh, it seems obvious, but we forget to do it, is that just pointing at what we're meant to talk about is much better than a presentation style shown in the research between signaled and unsignaled formats of the same instruction, where the presenter is not highlighting, is not pointing towards, is not circling. The unsignaled presentation tends to be a lot worse. And if you think about it, a diagram like this is very complex. The kids' eyes are going to be sort of scattered around to the different elements of the board, and they're not going to be processing the thing that you are narrating over at the same time that you're narrating. So the signaling is like a workaround for a very complex diagram, and then it gets you just to think about the thing they're supposed to think about. That's what all this cognitive science stuff really is how do we get kids to think about stuff really hard in optimal ways, and how do we get them to not forget it, right? So this is part of it. Now, signaling and using a diagram is already pretty great. I just want to mention one area of research I find very compelling, which is that if it's possible to draw the diagram yourself or to populate the screen with animations, as I've been doing so far, if you slowly populate the screen or progressively draw it while you're talking, think about how you've just incorporated all of the principles we've said so far. You're pointing their attention just to one thing at a time. As you're drawing, you are pairing it with your words, getting a dual coding effect. And you're not presenting them with way too much information at a time. So, in a way, slowly populating your screen with animations, if you use PowerPoint, or drawing on a document camera, the old school way of just going up to your chalkboard and drawing out the example as you do it is probably the most effective way to convey the information by using visuals, essentially. Um, I'll go into the next part, but I want to give you a pause point to kind of connect some of the things I've said. What have I said that's interested you? Is there anything that kind of excites you? And what have you learned so far? Go ahead and put that in the chat. I'd love to hear your responses. Eric, I love your contribution there. Yeah, and I presented those slides so many times, and no one's ever said, "Why didn't you just bring a real bicycle pump?" I guess because you can't see on the inside of it, but very true. If you have the object available, why not bring it? It's a visual that is physical in 3D. It's probably better, right? I love that. Excellent. And Desiree, I wasn't calling you out. I know you answered it correctly. Thank you. So let's go on to the next last part of the presentation. Just trying to end right on schedule so you can have the rest of your day back. It's my daughter's birthday party after this. I'm meant to go pick up some pizza and all types of stuff. So let's get going. The last thing, and this might sound startling for people that know how committed I am to explicit instruction, and that's that you're not going to be modeling the entire time. Modeling is not a very is really a first step to explaining anything. It's not really the main technique that you use. Really, the main technique you use is practice, essentially. But modeling is what optimizes that practice so that it's targeted and so the students aren't just guessing a lot, right? So, one of the things that we have to think about with explanations is how they fit into a full sequence of learning. And so I call that explain and release. Is that not students come to us at various stages of their learning, but normally when they're learning something new, like the topic that Blake mentioned earlier that I can't even remember, whenever they're learning something new, we can consider them novices. They don't have very much prior knowledge. They might have the wrong prior knowledge about it, right? And so it's safe to assume, looking at the expertise reversal effect of cognitive load theory, that they'll benefit from lots of models. We see here a teacher teaching how to add fractions with unlike denominators, going step by step. However, we don't just keep them here. This is this teacher doing all the heavy lifting for them. And we don't want to just make learning as easy as possible. We want to optimize the load or the challenge of every task so that it's just right. And so as the students acquire the skill, we have to start thinking about a faded sequence where the teacher in the middle here is now recruiting the students to do more and more of the work, to answer more and more of it. They may even start getting a little cheeky and starting to just ask maybe probing questions or give hints. We may be all in mini whiteboard land, but eventually every step of this problem needs to be solved independently of the teacher, and the teacher needs to check and see that they can all do it. So as they become experts in that domain, we have to fade out our guidance so that explanation is really not used very much at all, but we're really just circulating, giving feedback, giving suggestions, if and not modeling the material in full anymore. I have a very good example of this whole sequence that we will end with. I'm huge on video these days, obsessed with it. So seeing what we're talking about in a classroom can really illuminate what we're talking about. So let's just real quickly head on over. Um, I just in case you're interested, this is called Step Lab, and it's used in 14,000 schools around the world. But do you remember when we started and I said there was secure attention, optimized communication, drive thought, and so on? These buckets, that's how we organize all of our videos. And so Blake's stuff all goes into here, and you can see there are goals, and then there are steps that basically codify everything in teaching in a very granular way. If you look at optimized communication, I'm going to go under the goal of using modeling as a scaffold, and I'm going to scroll down to fade modeling scaffolds because it demonstrates what I've just been talking about. So I'm going here, and then I'm going to show you this video of a really excellent teacher doing the whole process from step one to the last step. Let's go take a look. Hey, Blake, let me know if you can't hear the sound.
So here's one example that I'm going to model for you first, and then you're going to do some paired examples and then some independent practice. So first of all, I've got a graph over here which shows me the temperature increasing on the x-axis and the pressure increasing on the y-axis. And I would like you to be able to explain that relationship. Why do we see that relationship on the graph? So the question is, describe and explain the relationship between temperature and pressure. So first of all, when the temperature of the gas is increased, the particles have more kinetic energy. So that means that they're going to be moving around with more energy, they're going to be moving around faster. This means that they will collide with the side of the container more frequently. This means more often. So they will collide and hit the side of the container more times. And not only that, they will also apply a bigger force when they hit the container because they've got more kinetic energy. So this means as temperature increases, the pressure increases. Now, we might remember that we name that relationship directly proportional. As one thing increases, the other thing increases by the same amount. And we can see that on the straight line starting from 0 in our graph. Okay, pens ready. You're going to do this one with your partner first before writing it down. This time we've got a balloon, and the pressure in the balloon is increasing when we heat up the bottle that the balloon is connected to. I've given you some sentence starters here for you to use with your partner and some key words that you need to use as well. So turn and tell your partner, 3, 2, 1, go. This causes the pressure to increase. And then what do they do? They will collide more frequently with the balloon and bottle with more force. Okay, and this causes the pressure to. And what's that relationship? Okay, team, you can have your pens in your hand. You're going to complete this example now independently. 3, 2, 1, go. Nice, well done. Okay, 10 seconds, and then have your green pens ready. Green pens in the air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, show me. Okay, let's check our answer, please. Next part. Now, I was really, really impressed to see us using more frequently, but even more impressed to see that we're using bigger force in our answer as well. And the final bit. Okay, this one you're going to do on your own, so you're not going to talk to your partner about it. We're going to do the thinking ourselves. Pens in your hand. Ready in 3, 2, 1, go.
So we are going to just finish there. But as you kind of think about these principles, right, that really rigorous education and really great learning is going to involve certain principles. And we saw today with Blake that attention is so critical. And we saw with this teacher too that certain routines and certain norms in the classroom were adhered to just get everybody focused and productive. But then also we need to optimize communication in ways that allow students to just think about manageable amounts of information at a time in a very scaffolded way so that students eventually are given the opportunities to do things themselves. And when they do it themselves, they're successful. We see students learning quickly and growing, and that's where the motivation comes from, rather than feeling depleted that you just can't do it and you're not being supported. We appreciate everybody here coming here today. Blake and I will stay on if you need for a Q&A, but otherwise I'm going to close down the recording, and I just so appreciate all of you coming out here and taking your this afternoon and this opportunity to learn just a little bit more about cognitive science. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Gene.
it.
You got
Thanks,
any
Gene.
you got any questions for us, Gene?
Um, you having a big party for your daughter?